perspective today. It's been a short while that we have known each other, and I think I've called you out as part of my sales outreach program a couple of months, and we've had a few conversations since then. I think one of the key things that stood out during our conversations is that despite the fact that the economy is not doing great, the IT budgets are low, and your specific situations where you're at were also not that great. However, you've come across as someone who was composed, very calm, very methodical, and also took the time out to explain to me a lot of things and sharing your own story. So thank you so much for that. Um, there are many, many people out there that I speak to regularly, and I have conversations with them, and I say, hey, you seem to be someone who's good enough to be a CTO or a CIO. Have you ever tried? And the answer generally is, I'm not really sure what skills are needed. I'm not really sure if I'm ready for it. And here I am speaking to someone like you who has done that, been there. So let me begin by asking you the question, what are some of the foundational skills that are needed by a CTO?
Hi, Sid, and thanks for inviting me for this conversation. It's a pleasure to be here having this chat. I think we're all learning in this journey in our careers, and I'm going to do my best to answer some of your very good questions. I think the first one, as you mentioned, there's a lot of people asking me that question as well, like what are the skills that I need? Okay, so I was doing a bit of preparation, trying to get the top three. It's not an easy task to start with, but I think the first thing that I'm gonna say is for technology, being a CTO, you have to forget technology and understand business first. Okay, um, and this is a reflection about why we exist as technology, as a technology department. And my thinking is we exist to serve the business. Okay, so there is a business in the back that is producing, manufacturing, and selling services, and technology is here to support. So I think it's funny because a lot of technology people, they come with very strong tech experience and expertise, but they end up struggling with the soft skills that are connecting that business to technology, making that bridge, and explaining uh, to the board or to your senior colleagues as part of the leadership group how technology can help them. Okay, so I think that is the first main skill that you have to develop in that process. The second top item that I thought was good to mention is to be a great leader. Okay, a lot of times we forget about leadership in technology specifically because it's usually composed by a bunch of technical people. Um, and a lot of times, very technical people, they struggle with things like communication and relationship and sales. And I think in technology, we need to support these people as leaders to empower them, to help them, to develop them to be successful, especially to be successful with point one, which is understanding the business. So I think in that leadership perspective, you're guiding a group of professionals to be successful in that journey. So leadership, we can go deep into that point. I will keep very simple, but leadership also requires a lot of self-awareness. So you have to understand yourself first, which is very difficult. A lot of people, they think they do, but we tend to first judge others instead of understanding yourself first. So understanding yourself to be able to lead others. So that leadership is a very important perspective. And see, so far, I haven't really touched on technology.
Yep.
So it's a business problem, it's leadership, it's people, right? Um, and the third item, I think, and it will be able to learn every day. The technology is a very dynamic um, um, science, let's say,
Hmm.
um, and every year there will be new development of technology trends, AI, data driven. We can see this, the evolution is going really fast. So we need to keep ourselves up to date. And in that top position as a CTO, you have to know a little bit of everything.
Hmm.
And you have to find how deep you need to understand. Um, you don't need to understand in very low level detail, otherwise you're gonna lose yourself in some discussions that are not gonna help you with the strategy. But you have to know at a minimum to actually support your team. So this is a very important balance you need to work on your learning journey of technology. And just to say that I'm not completely keeping technology out of this, as part of the learning is keeping your technology expertise up to date to help your teams and be part of that conversation. I think those are the key 3 points.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. If I have to summarize them, I think the first point was that you have to be very good in terms of the business, understanding the business problems and the domain that you're in. Again, that comes with a bit of soft skills, is what you said. The second part really is to come up with a way to lead people better in a way that they cater to the point number one, which is to better understand the business, etc. And the third one you're saying is sort of a continuous learning mechanism. And, and I believe you've also teased out a few other topics within that. For example, awareness. That is something that I've never heard of earlier. People mention, and now that I think of it, it's a pretty important thing, because unless you're aware of yourself, your own limitations, your own strengths, I think as a leader, it probably would be hard for you to figure out, how to build your own team into those leadership positions. Now, in terms of the constant or the regular learning that one has to do, as a technology person, we are generally, as a technology person myself, I'm very, very keen on jumping into the latest and the greatest and doing the deep dive. And you've mentioned about knowing just enough to understand how it fits with the longer term strategy, and not losing ourselves into the weeds. What sort of a challenge do you think that balance brings out? In other words, what are some of the key challenges that you, as a newly minted CTO, would expect to go through?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if I have a good answer for the right balance of knowledge, because we all come from different areas in technology, and it's a quite a broad field. So you're gonna see that every CTO, CIO will have some history and background in some areas stronger than others. So this is a in fact a challenge for the career growth and the eventual promotion into the chief level, exactly because we tend to specialize ourselves in technology.
Hmm.
My career was mainly across business analysis, which is maybe why my first point talks a lot about business problems and understanding business problems. So a business analysis does help you to keep a bit more generic in your approach to things, because you're looking into different problems. And as a good BA, I was across different areas, industries, and different projects, which helped me a lot to understand a little bit of everything and building more a resilient mind about and flexible mind, which is I think what the CTO needs to have. So a lot of people they get stuck in their careers because they became so specialized that it's really hard to speak another language. So in the analogy of learning a second language, it's always harder to learn a second language than is a third and a fourth. So, so it's really keeping your brain very flexible to learn new things as much as you can speak a simpler language with your colleagues from other departments that are not tech savvy to bridge that conversation with people that are part of your department and are tech savvy. And I don't think there is a right amount of knowledge that you have to have. I think is a something you have to test as you go.
I think, in a way, what you're saying is, in terms of the challenges that you're faced with, you are constantly faced with the challenge of that balance being one of those things. Now, how do you look at maintaining that balance, not just within your team, but as a CTO? You have to, like you said, the point number one is managing the business understanding, the business side of things. How do you manage the expectations of a senior executive leadership who are non-tech, and then also go back to your team who are very tech heavy, right? And I see that a lot in my own projects when I work closely with CXOs. I often double down as sort of a consultant doing the lobbying between these two groups, and I see how hard it is. And I then sit down and wonder how hard it should be for a CTO, because the budgets are approved by people who are not from a tech industry, especially in an industry such as yourself, which is where technology is not the outcome, right? Your business is not churning out algorithms for a living. How do you approach that problem? Do you start with technology or from executives?
Hmm.
What are your thoughts?
So yeah, so I'm gonna repeat myself. Of course, that's the reason I put the business understanding first because they don't really. Well, you may deal with people that they understand technology, but usually they don't. And so you have to go and speak their language first. And for you to speak their language, you need to learn their language. So you need to learn the business language, and you may need to learn every department's language. So you're dealing with finance, sales, inventory, warehousing, etc. So that's the first process. So if you get into their business, it's going to be easier for them to understand you, and you make them understand you to a point that then you have to, okay, what are the outcomes we are looking for here?
Mm-hmm.
The biggest challenge we have nowadays, and this is slowly changing, is technology is still seen as a department that is fixing printers, laptops and mobile phones, or helping you with a Teams call. We are laughing here, but actually it still happens a lot.
Yeah.
And as opposed to that, technology is a transformational department. We are across, the main um, advancements that are happening right now, as such as AI. And people struggle even to understand how AI can help us, and people are scared of AI. So what you need to do is you need to step back from the that and the trends
Mm-hmm.
and try to help the business to understand, like, hey, what are your problems? And then once we discuss that, I may look into AI and see how AI can help us. So it's always trying to be solution agnostic
Mm-hmm.
to the things you're resolving. And then, of course, a bit of learning educational piece around how to use AI. We know that AI is available. You can, just browse and access ChatGPT or Copilot. So the technology is pushing people to change. And I think as a CTO, we need to help them to and educate our users and our employees on how to behave in front of those tech transformations. Just a final comment on that. Age groups are something to watch for because younger people, they come into the business way more tech savvy than older people. In general, we know there are, exceptions, etc. So we still are in that big transition between non-tech and tech people, and older and younger. So we always need to adjust our communication, but always think about, okay, what is the value we are trying to achieve?
Yeah. So, in terms of the example that you said, which is people still tend to think of IT as an enabling function or a support function, and I can absolutely agree to it, especially given the fact that I work with mostly mid-market businesses in New Zealand. And a lot many people probably listening to this may not fully understand the scale of the New Zealand economy, or rather the lack of it, that individuals begin to wear more than one hat at any given point in time. Just the other day, I was speaking to a CFO of a business who's also running the technology transformation, right? And imagine that. And then in contrast to people working in a business trying to learn technology. So I think it's I totally understand where you're coming from. But how do you see we could begin making those connections with the business in such a way that we change their behavior, right? Because a lot of these businesses that I've worked with and I've known personally, I see that it is very heavily dependent on a process. And because people stay in the same business for decades, in some cases, the process gets wrapped around them, and it becomes really hard for the business to move away from it. So, what advice would you give, or what observations have you made where some experiments work better than the others to move people away from that legacy processes to newer ones?
Mm-hmm. You touched on something interesting. You mentioned about a CFO, leading tech transformations, and I'm gonna put a comment there before I answer. It's was a traditional structure that IT is part of finance.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly historically why that was the case, but I think a lot of the tech evolved via finance, or finance was a department that was looking for a lot of advancements in technology. Um, and nothing against my CFO colleagues, but the reality is sometimes it's quite challenging when you have someone that doesn't understand technology, leading technology.
Mhm.
And I think the confusion that happens is people tend to think that technology is obvious because you have all these applications you can buy, install, and use. And the reality is we found that that's not true because a lot of companies acquired a bunch of application solutions,
Mhm.
and they found the use and the application wasn't very well established for that organization or for that problem. So it wasn't actually resolving their problem. In
Mhm.
fact, created a problem with a lot of processes, or serving the software. The software is not serving the people. And I think this probably connects to the second portion of your question and my answer here, where you have then a lot of people that they're building business processes around them, and they're probably against technology because of a bad implementation in the past, or a lack of understanding of how technology can help them. We know very well a lot of people still using spreadsheets and pretty much running a system on a spreadsheet and saving those spreadsheets on their local drive. You know? part of the logic in their brains. So, so there is a big risk in that, a risk to the business, a risk to the continuity of the business. So I think there's to find a solution. It's not a simple answer, but one is understanding the risks of that current state.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think about, that person at some stage will retire
Mm-hmm.
or leave the business. The risk of the data that is probably held on someone's local drive,
Mm-hmm.
probably sensitive data. So it's not uncommon to see HR data on spreadsheets. So you have to look at the risks, and then you have to put a business case with the leadership, with the board, to explain all the risks that business is running currently.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one aspect. The other aspect is really then working with that person who is probably taking care of that business process, say the HR data, could be
Mm-hmm.
an HR person, and explain to them those risks in a more personal way, and try to take them through the journey of understanding why digitizing that business process is important
Mm-hmm.
for the business, for that person, and for all the employees. So how important it is to have your data in a secure way,
Mm-hmm.
how quicker it will be if that person is running a proper HR system, for example,
Mm-hmm.
in showing that it's not against the work that the person does, but it's actually helping them to spend more time with the right value and activities, where you think like an HR person should be dealing and helping people, as opposed to running a system, a manual system. So you could start shifting, your focus, and explaining and taking that person for a journey to explain how important that is. Because a lot of people, you have to think about this is, although it's not transparent, because we in our society we are afraid of discussing that. But most people are afraid of losing their jobs. It's simple like that.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean that. Of course, sometimes technology does shift jobs around. And I'm going to say shift because you always need it somewhere else that is adding more value. But a lot of times it's not taking anyone's job away. So I think that it's a bit of a journey to take those people and organizations into a better state.
Yep. I think you've mentioned quite a bit around how to speak to people and kind of remove their fear of losing something or missing something. What I found in my own personal experience is that when I'm running a few projects, I come across so much of technical debt in a certain project that, again, from a consulting perspective, when I come in and try to do a quick turnaround of things, I can almost sense how bringing out the ROI is so hard because the technical debt is so much that the cost to come out of it is quite amazingly higher at times. Again, to your earlier point on how CFOs these days run the technology side of the story, I think that also ties in with the same thing, which is most of these mid-market businesses do not have enough budgets to run a full-fledged IT department, and they're somewhere in between the transition, so to speak. So as a CTO, when it comes to running your existing team under tighter budgets and trying to manage the expectations of the tech people in your team, how do you handle that trade-off between the business expectations and ROI on one side and the technical limitations and the reality that things are still stuck on a on a hard drive, for example.
Yeah, I think this discussion about technical debt is quite interesting, and we see across all organizations, technical debt is a bit like insurance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can still drive a car without insurance, and I think in New Zealand you're not obliged to have insurance, I'm afraid. But I mean, you can still drive without insurance, but then if you crash your car and it's written off, you're gonna regret your whole life that you haven't bought insurance. So the technical debt is like that, right? It's a big cost up front, but if it happens, you're gonna regret. And we have seen cases around the world where technical debt actually stopped operations for weeks, and so it's a big thing. But it's a challenge, and this is one of the things why the CTO exists, because he or she is able to share the message to the board and put a nice story behind, because we have always to do a translation of all the technical risks into a very nice soft story, and explain why we need to invest to change, you know. So it's always becoming a bit of salesperson. Um, and this is back to that first discussion, the first question. And we technical people, we tend to not be very good at the sales portion. So we struggle in doing a one pager that translates the return of investment of our projects. So we talked about technical debt, and this is pretty much like BAU. It's mostly operational challenges. And we're not even talking about transformational projects. So if you're struggling to have money to keep the lights on, you will need to work hard on that, because that's to run the basics. Selling transformational projects, they kind of have a bit of a different challenge. Sometimes quite funny, because like AI is quite trendy, and you see a lot of board members looking for AI just because they heard that AI is going to transform businesses, etc. So, funny enough, sometimes it's easier to invest in some of that, some of those transformational projects, more than it is to keep the lights on. And AI is quite an interesting thing, because AI, the investment, we already know, you can only justify the investment if you have the data in your business organized and structured. And if you have the systems in place, and if people are not using paper manual forms, they are actually using systems to comply with things. So you see, AI investment is actually usually starts with the basics. So you have to connect the stories. You have to connect how do you get to the future. You have to invest in your basics. You have to invest even in your technical debt. You have to solve your technical debt to actually invest into the future. And that backlog of things you have not resolved over time is going to grow as a snowball effect, right? So I think this is the two dimensions here, which is current state, lights on versus future. Although they are two different things, they kind of work together, right? So I think is always when we talk about selling a project, is always bringing them through the journey of how and why we need to solve the problem, and how we can invest. And then you mentioned about current um, economy situation and struggle of most of companies and government. This is interesting because it just increases the challenge on prioritization, but in a way forces us and teaches us on how to prioritize things in life. Okay. And this is something that as humans we struggle, right? because you always want to buy more and have the next iPhone generation, etc. So um, times like that, it just challenges us to pick the battles better, like to choose better. But I don't think it does slow us down. I think it just challenges more to focus on what is really important. And I think this is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think to your point about the ability to sell the story to the board, what I have noticed is that if internal teams are not doing the selling, sometimes external vendors do a great job at selling. And one of the use case that I've seen in such a case is when I went in to make a sale about a revenue leakage report that I was building. And I said, have you ever been through a journey of understanding your data? The answer was yes, we had an AI consultant last quarter do something. And my question was, what happened? Where did it go? Are you proceeding on that? And the person says, oh, no, we're not, because it is now proven to us that they can't do anything great. It's all a fluff story. And when I eventually looked at the data and their situation, what I saw that the technical debt is so high that AI probably can't solve things much faster. And that goes against the whole idea. And a new idea gets sold to them that it's not helpful at all. Right. So, in that sense, I think I agree to your point that sales is extremely important. And it's more important for people who are internal, and especially people such as yourself who are CTOs. But if you put aside budget constraints for a moment, if you had unlimited budgets in theory, how would you prefer to organize your IT hierarchy? And I ask this question in the context of many other questions that I get during my consultative projects, where they say, which one works better? Do we have a BI specialist sitting inside of a department and being a specialist in that department, or should they have a central hub and spoke kind of or a what you say, the center of excellence sort of a way? So if budget was not a concern, how would you organize your IT team?
Right. Okay. So I'm gonna challenge your question a little bit here because I understand where that is coming from, but I think having budget limitations are quite healthy
Mm-hmm.
to the thinking on how to structure your team. Okay. Um, what I will answer you in this point, because I understand where you're coming from. What you want to do with your IT structure is to have enough internal capacity and knowledge to retain your IP,
Mm-hmm.
to understand your business, and to bridge towards external consultancies or vendors. I don't think, of course, it depends on the size of the organization, but in a nutshell, most organizations are going to have a balance between internal and external. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this balance is often discussed whether you have, the 50-50 and how that works. The reality is, you're never going to have everything. Even if you had an unlimited budget, you may have limited resources. You may have limited capability in New Zealand, for example. So there is always a limitation somewhere. But what you want to build is a team that can understand the business and can talk technology and can deliver the main projects you have.
Mm-hmm.
And your extension, your contractors and consultants are there to support you with specialized knowledge that you may not need to have because it's a one-off situation. I'm going to put another thing here. It's interesting. Sometimes, like you mentioned, consultants, they come to a business to advise something, and um, a lot of times the leadership team listens more to the external person than internal people. That's actually a problem because you should trust your internal teams, and your consultants should be working with your internal teams to deliver something greater. So The other discussion that you mentioned, where a Power BI analyst, developer, or a data analyst sits, um, to me, I don't think that's always relevant. That discussion. A lot of times, the discussion is happening just because of reporting lines and
Mm-hmm.
probably some ego around the business or on who is managing who. The reality is, I don't care much about that because as long as we have as long as we are working as a team, regardless of reporting line, and we have a structured approach and a design and architecture in IT to follow, people can be working in different departments. My thinking about that, which goes into a completely different subject here, IT is nowadays, given some exceptions, but IT nowadays is part of the whole business.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can say the business now is part of IT. So whether in the future we're still gonna have a technology department because all your business people need to know about technology, or the whole organization becomes technology, which
Mm-hmm.
that happens sometimes with banking and telco because your main product is technology. That can happen both ways, but the reality is this segregation
Mm-hmm.
will disappear over time, and it's already needing to because we need to have a business and technology quite together, you know. So um, I'm thinking like the you have to have leadership, you have to have architecture, you have to have design because you need to know where we are going to as an organization. I think this is very important. But where you're reporting to, or if you're more a business or more technology, that doesn't matter much. It's going to be really dynamic in that organization to see if that is helping us or not. And we have to constantly review the structure and constantly change and adapt. I think that's the thing.
Fantastic! It's a great insight. I think we are at time now. Otherwise, I would have probably gone further. It'll probably make sense for us to catch up once again. And I think you're hinting on to something really powerful here, which is businesses becoming technology driven to an extent where IT is part of the business and business is part of the IT. I think the
Yeah.
questions around governance, around standardizations, protocols, procedures are key to that. But if people were to reach out to you and know more about these things, it looks like you have a lot of ideas around this. Where can they go? Where they can reach out to you?
Yeah, I think the best tool we have for now is LinkedIn. So I'll be there. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, and I'm happy for people to engage me there. And I like to have a very personal conversation, very friendly conversation on that. I have no issue to reply to any questions that people may have.
Cool. Hey, with that, thank you so much, Caio. It's been great chatting with you, and I hope to see you in the future again.
You too.